Dorothea Ravenshaw had been seated in the cramped morning room of her father's Cheapside lodgings when the messenger knocked. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the thin walls like a judge's gavel. She'd been darning stockings, a skill she'd perfected over the past year of genteel poverty, when the sealed parchment was placed in her hands. Miss D. Ravenshaw. Personal and urgent. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The seal bore no crest. For one wild moment, she'd allowed herself to hope it might be an offer of employment, perhaps a governess position, or a lady's companion role that would at least provide her with a roof over her head when the inevitable happened. Instead, it was an invitation to the Pemberton ball that very evening. She'd nearly laughed aloud at the cruelty of it. An invitation to watch her sisters parade their success, while her father's creditors circled like carrion birds, waiting for the final collapse. But there, at the bottom in a different hand, was a postscript. Come. It is your last chance. Yef. Eleanor Fenimore. Her mother's oldest friend, and the only person in society who still acknowledged Dorothea's existence. That was how, 8 hours later, Dorothea found herself standing in a ballroom that might as well have been a cathedral for all its impossible grandeur. She'd forgotten what wealth looked like up close, the way candlelight transformed silk into liquid gold, how jewels could make ordinary women look like creatures from mythology. She'd forgotten the sound of an orchestra that wasn't playing in the street for coins, the scent of hothouse flowers in January, the particular echo of laughter that came from people who'd never known hunger or fear. Her sisters were there, of course. They were always there, at the center of every glittering assembly, each married to increasing degrees of consequence. Sophia, now Viscountess Ashford, wore emeralds that could have fed a family for a decade. Caroline, the Countess of Bellingham, had her hand perpetually on her swollen belly, announcing to anyone who would listen that the Earl's heir would arrive by summer. Even Lillian, the youngest at 25, had secured a baron and seemed determined to compensate for his modest title with an immodest display of rubies. None of them had seen Dorothea arrive. None of them were looking for her. Why would they? She was 33 years old, wearing a dress that had been fashionable when she was 20, standing in the shadows because stepping into the light would only invite questions she couldn't answer. Where have you been, Miss Ravenshaw? Why haven't we seen you? What are your prospects? She had no answers that wouldn't shame them all. There you are! Eleanor Fenimore materialized beside her like a summoned spirit, pressing a glass of champagne into Dorothea's hand. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. I nearly didn't. Dorothea took a small sip, feeling the bubbles burn against her throat. When had she last tasted champagne? Your note was rather cryptic. Eleanor's expression turned grave. My husband met with your father's solicitor this afternoon. The railway investment has failed completely, Dorothea. Every penny is gone. Without immediate intervention, your father will be arrested for debt before the week is out. The champagne suddenly tasted like ash. Dorothea had known it was bad. Her father's increasing desperation, the way creditors had begun appearing at the door, the move from their respectable Mayfair townhouse to these shabby Cheapside rooms. But arrested, imprisoned. How much does he owe? The sum Eleanor named was astronomical. Impossible. I see, Dorothea said quietly, because what else was there to say? She couldn't earn that much in a lifetime. Her sister's husbands had made it clear that the Ravenshaw family had already received quite enough. Charity! There was nowhere left to turn. I thought you should know, Eleanor said softly. And I thought you should be here tonight. Among your own kind, one last time. One last time. Because soon she would be something else entirely. A governess in some remote household, a paid companion to an elderly widow, a woman who'd once been gentry but would spend the rest of her life pretending not to remember what that had meant. Dorothea was about to thank Eleanor and make her excuses. She couldn't bear to stay, couldn't watch her sister's happiness when her own world was crumbling, when the music stopped. Not a natural pause between dances, but an abrupt, shocked silence that spread through the ballroom like spilled ink. She looked up and saw him. He stood in the entrance as if he'd been carved from the same marble as the pillars, tall, severe, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see through pretense and polished to the bones beneath. She knew who he was immediately. Everyone in England knew Leopold Cavendish, Duke of Thornfield. The man who'd refused every marriage-minded mamma in London for 15 years. The reclusive duke who attended society functions as rarely as he attended church, and with the same stony obligation. But he wasn't looking at the hostess, or the season's celebrated beauties, or anyone he should have been looking at. He was looking at her. Dorothea felt Eleanor's hand tighten on her arm, felt the weight of 100 curious stares swiveling in her direction, felt her heart begin to hammer against her corset stays. The Duke began to walk, not the leisurely stroll of a man surveying his options, but the purposeful stride of someone who'd already made a decision and saw no reason to delay its execution. He crossed the ballroom floor, stepped past debutantes in their white dresses and jeweled matrons in their calculated gowns, walked directly toward the shadows where Dorothea stood, frozen, barely breathing. He stopped in front of her. And then Leopold Cavendish, Duke of Thornfield, did something no one in that ballroom would ever forget. He knelt. "Miss Dorothea Ravenshaw," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. "I have a proposition for you. One that will solve your father's difficulties and provide me with something I require. I ask only for 10 minutes of your time to explain." Dorothea stared down at him, at this man who held more power in his title than most people held in their entire bloodline, who was on his knees before a woman society had already dismissed and forgotten. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why me?" Something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Not pity. Not calculation. something else entirely. "Because, Miss Ravenshaw," he said quietly, "you are the only woman in this room who isn't looking at me like I'm a prize to be won. And that, I've discovered, is rarer than any title or fortune." He extended his hand. Dorothea looked at it, this offering from a man who could change her entire existence with a word, who knelt before her while her own sisters had learned to look through her as if she were glass. She thought of her father in debtor's prison, of a lifetime spent in service to other people's families, of being 33 and invisible and utterly, completely alone. She placed her hand in his. "10 minutes," she agreed. The Duke rose, her hand still in his, and led her toward the library as the ballroom erupted into shocked whispers behind them. Neither of them looked back. The Pemberton Library smelled of leather and old secrets. Dorothea's hand trembled as she released the Duke's arm, suddenly aware of how small the room felt with him in it. Through the closed door, she could hear the muffled roar of speculation, hundreds of voices trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. "Please sit." The Duke gestured to a wing-back chair near the fireplace, but remained standing himself, hands clasped behind his back like a general preparing to deliver orders. Dorothea perched on the edge of the seat, her spine rigid. "Your Grace, I confess I don't understand." "Your father owes £17,000, he interrupted, his voice clipped and businesslike. "The creditors will have him arrested within days. Your sister's husbands have refused further assistance. You have no prospects, no income, and no marriage offers forthcoming at your age." Each word landed like a blow. Dorothea's cheeks burned. "If you brought me here to enumerate my failures, I brought you here to offer you a solution." He turned to face her fully, and she was struck by the absolute absence of pity in his expression. "I need a wife, Miss Ravenshaw. Not a bride, a wife. Someone intelligent enough to manage my estates, mature enough to understand this is a business arrangement, and invisible enough that society won't expect a love match." Dorothea's breath caught. "Invisible? You spent years being overlooked. So have I, in my own way, overlooked as a man, seen only as a title." Something flickered across his features. "I'm offering you a transaction. I pay your father's debts. You become my duchess. We maintain separate lives under one roof. No expectations beyond competence and discretion." "Why?" Dorothea whispered. "Why not choose someone younger or someone?" "Because younger women want romance. Beautiful women want adoration. You, Miss Ravenshaw, want survival." His gray eyes held hers. "And that makes you the only honest woman in that ballroom." Dorothea's hands twisted in her lap, crushing the worn silk of her gown. The Duke's words hung in the air between them, like a contract written in smoke, clear enough to read, but impossible to hold. "You're asking me to marry you," she said slowly, testing the weight of each word. "But you don't want a wife. You want an employee. I want a partner." He moved to the window, gazing out at the torchlit gardens. My estate spanned 4 counties. My business interests reach from Cornwall to India. I need someone capable of managing correspondence, overseeing household accounts, representing the duchy when I cannot. He paused. My grandmother is failing. She's held Ravenscroft Hall together for decades, but she needs to rest. I need someone who can step into that role without requiring courtship or pretty lies. And in exchange, my father's debts disappear. Every penny, plus a comfortable annuity for his remaining years. A settlement in your name that even I cannot touch. Security, Miss Ravenshaw. Isn't that what you've been chasing since you gave away your dowry? The accuracy of it stole her breath. He'd done his research, known exactly what leverage to apply. What about children? Heirs? The duchy will pass to my cousin's son. I have no interest in producing an heir under obligation. His reflection in the window glass showed no emotion. This arrangement offers you freedom from poverty and me freedom from expectation. We both gain what we need without the complications of sentiment. Dorothea stood, her legs unsteady. She thought of her father's haunted eyes, of the bailiffs, who would come at dawn, of 30 more years spent invisible in other people's homes. How long do I have to decide? I leave for Ravenscroft in 3 days. You'll answer before then. He finally turned to face her. I won't ask again, Miss Ravenshaw. This is the only offer either of us will receive. She met his storm-gray eyes and saw her own desperation reflected back. Then I accept, Your Grace. I accept. The announcement appeared in the Morning Post 2 days later, and London society erupted like a disturbed beehive. By noon, Dorothea's sisters had descended upon the Cheapside lodgings in a flurry of silk and scandalized whispers. A duke, Sophia breathed, pacing the cramped parlor as though she couldn't quite believe the walls around her. You've managed to secure a duke when we'd all assumed. She caught herself, but the damage was done. When we'd all assumed you were finished. Caroline sat heavily in the threadbare chair, her hand protective over her swollen belly. People are talking, Dorothea. They're saying the most dreadful things. That you trapped him somehow, that he's gone mad, that there's some hidden scandal. Let them talk. Dorothea's voice was steady, though her hands trembled as she poured tea into chipped cups that had once been part of a proper set. The Duke knows his own mind. Does he? Lillian leaned forward, her youth making her cruel honesty almost forgivable. Because from where society stands, this makes no sense. You're 33, Dorothea. You have no fortune, no connections that he doesn't already possess, no. She gestured vaguely. No obvious advantages. The words cut deeper than any blade because they were true. Dorothea had asked herself the same questions in the sleepless hours since accepting his proposal. Perhaps that is the advantage, she replied quietly, that I want nothing from him but what he's offered. Her sisters exchanged glances, Those silent conversations she'd never been privy to, not even when they were children, and she was giving away her future for theirs. "Well," Sophia said finally, "we should be grateful, I suppose. Father's debts are settled. The family name is saved." She rose, smoothing her expensive skirts. "Though I do hope you know what you're doing." After they left, the Duke's messenger arrived with a small velvet box. Inside lay a sapphire ring so old the gold had worn thin in places. It stoned the deep blue of midnight oceans. Dorothea slipped it onto her finger and felt its weight settle like an anchor or a chain. She couldn't tell which. The journey north took 3 days, and they spent it in near silence. Leopold rode alongside the carriage for most of the journey, and Dorothea was grateful. Conversation felt like walking across ice. One wrong step, and everything would crack beneath them. Ravenscross Hall appeared through the mist like something from a Gothic tale, all dark stone and towering spires, ancient oaks framing the approach like sentinels guarding a fortress. Dorothea pressed her gloved hand against the carriage window, her breath fogging the glass. This was to be her home. The word felt foreign in her mouth. "It's formidable," Leopold said, suddenly beside the carriage on his mount. "Most find it unwelcoming. Most probably lack imagination," Dorothea replied before she could stop herself. "I think it's magnificent." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, before the mask of indifference returned. The staff assembled in the great hall where a sea of curious faces quickly schooled to neutrality. Leopold made perfunctory introductions, his tone businesslike, until an elderly woman in black silk stepped forward. "Welcome, child," she said, her voice warm despite her severe appearance. "I am the Dowager Duchess. You must be exhausted." "I'd like to show her the library first, grandmother," Leopold interjected. "If Miss Ravenshaw is amenable." Dorothea nodded, though exhaustion pulled at her bones. The library proved worth the effort. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling books, leather and parchment, and knowledge stretching toward vaulted ceilings. Candlelight danced across gilded spines. "Oh!" Dorothea breathed, moving toward the shelves as though drawn by invisible threads. Her fingers traced the titles reverently. "Is that—" She stopped before a glass case. "Your Grace, this is a Gutenberg Bible. You recognize it." Not a question. "My mother taught me Latin before she died. I used to read everything I could find." Her voice caught. "Before there was no time for such things." Leopold stepped closer, studying her face rather than the manuscript. "What else did you have to give up, Miss Ravenshaw?" The question, asked without pity, nearly undid her. "Everything," she whispered. "Everything but hope." The Dowager Duchess summoned Dorothea to her private sitting room on the 3rd morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a woman who seemed carved from granite and willpower, spine straight despite her years, eyes sharp as cut glass. "Sit, child. We need to speak plainly." She poured tea with hands that trembled only slightly. My grandson has made an arrangement with you. A business transaction, I suspect. Dorothea's fingers tightened on her cup. Your Grace, I don't think. I raised Leopold after his mother died in childbirth. The dowager's voice carried the weight of old grief. His father blamed him for that death. Every day of Leopold's childhood, he was reminded that he cost his father the only thing he'd ever loved. She set down her cup with deliberate care. So my son taught his heir that love was weakness. That emotion was currency to be spent and regretted. That every human connection was merely a transaction with inevitable loss. Dorothea's throat constricted. He was a child. He was an investment. The bitterness in those words could have curdled milk. I tried to counter it, but a grandmother's affection couldn't undo a father's daily cruelty. Leopold learned his lessons well. He's built walls so high that even he can't see over them anymore. Why are you telling me this? The dowager leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Because you're the first woman he's chosen who doesn't want something from him. The first who understands survival without prettying it up with romance. Her weathered hand covered Dorothea's. I'm dying, my dear. The physicians give me months, perhaps less. Before I go, I need to know someone will reach him. I can't promise. I'm not asking you to love him. The dowager's voice cracked. I'm asking you to teach him what I could not, that love is not a liability. That being seen, truly seen, is not the same as being destroyed. Tears gathered in ancient eyes. Show him that vulnerability is not the weakness his father claimed. Please. He's spent 40 years believing himself unworthy of anything beyond transaction. Dorothea felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous softening. I'll try, she whispered. The partnership began with ledgers. Leopold appeared in the morning room a week after her arrival, carrying account books thick as bricks. The North Tenant Farms, he said without preamble. There's a dispute over water rights. I'd value your assessment. Dorothea looked up from her correspondence, startled. You're asking my opinion? I'm asking for your judgment. You said you wanted to be useful. He set the books on the desk between them. So be useful. It became their routine. Each morning he brought problems, tenant grievances, crop rotation strategies, staff disputes, and waited while she read, considered, advised. He didn't always agree with her conclusions, but he always listened. And when she proved right about the tenant dispute, suggesting a shared well that satisfied both families, something shifted in how he looked at her. The evenings were different. Softer. It started when Dorothea mentioned reading Dante in the original Italian. Leopold's mask cracked just slightly. You know Italian? And Latin, French, some Greek. My mother believed education was wasted on no one. She smiled sadly. Though society disagreed. That night, he brought her to the observatory, a domed tower at the estate's highest point. through the brass telescope, stars emerged like diamonds scattered on velvet. "My father called this frivolous," Leopold said quietly, adjusting the lens. "Said a duke should concern himself with earthly power, not celestial mysteries. Your father was wrong about many things, I think." He turned to her then, candlelight catching the planes of his face. "What makes you say that? Because you're here, aren't you? Still looking at stars despite what you were taught." Dorothea met his gaze. "That's not weakness, your grace. That's hope." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of all the things neither of them knew how to say. "Leopold," he said finally, "when we're alone, call me Leopold. Then you must call me Dorothea." He smiled, barely, briefly, but it transformed his entire face. "Dorothea," he repeated, testing the shape of her name. "It suits you." And in that moment, the transaction became something else entirely. Lady Cordelia Ashworth arrived on a Tuesday, her carriage bearing the Cavendish crest and an air of unquestioned authority. She swept into Ravenscross Hall as though she'd never left, trailing servants and expensive perfume. "Leopold, darling." She kissed the air near his cheek, ignoring Dorothea entirely. "I've come as soon as I heard about grandmother's decline. Family must rally in times of crisis." Dorothea felt the shift immediately, the way the staff's eyes flickered between them, uncertain whose orders to follow. Cordelia had been widowed young, her late husband Leopold's cousin, and she'd spent the past 5 years positioning herself as Ravenscross Hall's unofficial mistress. "Lady Cordelia," Leopold said carefully, "you've met my wife." "Oh yes, the new Duchess." Cordelia's smile was crystalline. "How unexpected. But then, I suppose at your age, Leopold, unconventional choices become necessary." The words were poison wrapped in silk. Dorothea lifted her chin. "Lady Cordelia, I trust your journey was pleasant. Exhausting, actually. I'll need my usual rooms prepared." She turned to the housekeeper without waiting for Dorothea's response. "Mrs. Bramwell, have my things taken to the blue suite. And do something about these dreadful flower arrangements. They're positively funereal." Dorothea had spent a week learning the staff's names, understanding the household rhythms, carefully building the authority Leopold had entrusted to her. Cordelia dismantled it in minutes. Over dinner, Cordelia held court, regaling guests with stories that positioned her at the center of every Cavendish family triumph. Of course, Leopold always valued my counsel. "Didn't you, darling? I practically ran this estate after your father died." "That was kind of you," Dorothea said evenly. "But Leopold has a duchess now." Cordelia's laugh was like breaking glass. "Yes, how fortunate. Though one wonders what a woman of your limited experience can truly offer a man of Leopold's standing." She leaned forward conspiratorially toward the other guests. "Between us, I suspect our dear Duke married out of pity. Such a charitable heart. Leopold's fork clattered against his plate. But before he could speak, Cordelia had already moved on, her damage done. That night, Dorothea stood alone in the observatory, wondering if she'd been foolish to believe she could ever truly belong here. The autumn ball transformed Ravenscross Hall into a glittering spectacle. 200 guests filled the ballroom, peers, politicians, everyone who mattered in England's highest circles. Dorothea wore sapphire silk that matched her engagement ring, and for the first time in her life, she felt beautiful. Leopold had told her so with his eyes before duty pulled him away to greet arriving dignitaries. Then Cordelia struck. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I might have your attention." Cordelia stood on the musician's dais, her voice carrying across the sudden hush. "I've made a distressing discovery that, in good conscience, I cannot keep silent." Dorothea's blood turned to ice. These letters, Cordelia held up folded papers, were found among correspondence in the late Baron Ravenshaw's effects. Written by our new Duchess to a confidant, they reveal a calculated campaign to ensnare my dear cousin through manipulation of his sympathies. She began to read, her voice dripping false sorrow. "Eleanor, the Duke is precisely as you predicted, desperate for someone who appears to want nothing. I shall play the martyr so convincingly he'll believe salvation lies in saving me. His wealth will secure father's freedom and my future." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Dorothea felt the walls closing in, felt every eye turned toward her with dawning horror and delighted scandal. Another passage. "I've studied him carefully. He mistakes loneliness for compatibility. By the time he realizes I'm as calculating as every other woman, it will be too late." "Those aren't mine," Dorothea whispered, but her voice was lost in the rising murmur of shock. "How tragic," Cordelia continued. "That Leopold, who guarded his heart so carefully, was deceived by the very qualities he thought made her different." She turned to the crowd with theatrical sympathy. "We must forgive him. Who could have suspected such duplicity in a desperate spinster?" Dorothea's vision blurred. She saw Leopold's face across the ballroom, frozen, unreadable. Saw her sister's husbands shaking their heads in disgust. Saw the Dowager Duchess reaching toward her, too frail to cross the distance. She'd survived poverty, survived invisibility. But she couldn't survive this, being seen at last, only to be despised. Dorothea gathered her skirts and ran. Dorothea reached the entrance hall, her packed valise already waiting. She'd known, somehow, that Cordelia would force this moment. Her hand was on the door when Leopold's voice cut through the darkness. "Where are you going?" She couldn't turn around, couldn't bear to see disappointment in his eyes. "Away! Before I cause you more damage than I already have. Those letters are forgeries." His footsteps approached. "The paper is too new. The ink doesn't match anything in your father's estate. Cordelia made a crucial error. She referenced events that happened after your father's death." Dorothea's breath caught. You knew? Then why didn't you? Because I needed to see something first. His hand touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. I needed to see if you'd run. If you believe I doubt you. Everyone else does. I am not everyone else. He turned her to face him, and his eyes blazed with something she'd never seen before. Rage, yes, but something more. Something that looked like fear. Come back with me. Please. They returned to find the ballroom in chaos. Leopold strode to the center, and silence fell like a blade. Lady Cordelia has entertained you with fiction, he announced, his voice carrying absolute authority. These letters are clever forgeries designed to destroy the one person who threatened her position in this household. He held up the papers. Note the paper stock, produced after Baron Ravenshaw's death. The ink, a modern formulation. The handwriting, close, but not perfect. Cordelia's face was drained of color. Leopold, I was only trying to protect you. You were protecting yourself. He turned to address the assembly. My cousin knew the boy I was forced to become, cold, calculating, treating every relationship as transaction. But my wife... His voice softened. Dorothea knows the man I choose to be. He crossed to where Dorothea stood, trembling. And then, as 200 guests watched in stunned silence, Leopold Cavendish knelt before her for the second time. I knelt once to offer you a bargain, he said quietly. I kneel now to offer you my heart. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that being seen isn't the same as being destroyed. His hand found hers. That love is not a transaction, but a transformation. Tears streamed down Dorothea's face. Leopold, I was afraid, he continued, his voice breaking. Afraid that if I let myself love you, I'd lose you the way my father lost my mother. But I've learned something these past months. The only thing worse than losing love is never having the courage to claim it. He rose, pulling her close. Stay. Not as my duchess. Not as my business partner. Stay as the woman who taught me that I am worthy of love, and that giving my heart doesn't make me weak, it makes me whole. Dorothea cupped his face, seeing him fully for the first time. Not the Iron Duke, not the scarred boy, but the man who'd chosen her when the world said she had nothing left to offer. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. I'm home. Their kiss silenced the ballroom. And when they finally broke apart, even Cordelia had the grace to slip away into the shadows where she belonged. The Dowager Duchess watched from her chair, tears on her weathered cheeks, and smiled. Her grandson had finally learned what she'd always known, that the greatest strength lies not in walls, but in the courage to let them fall. And that's the end of this story. Thank you so much for watching. If you stayed until the end, you're the real MVP. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Also, please like and subscribe to this channel. It will help others come across this channel faster and they'll fall in love with these captivating Victorian-era romance stories, just as you did. Until next time, remember, your worth is never determined by how others see you, but by how you see yourself. Bye for now.